Mew is a Pokemon that has always had really interesting cards. Even if you go look at things like Ancient Mew or the more recent Mew EX that has Versatile that was used in Night March, they really like to play off of the lore around Mew where it was the first Pokemon or it can use any attack, it can learn any attack. This Black Star promo Mew in particular has always interested me because of its devolution attack. You can remove the top evolutionary card off of one of your opponent's Pokemon, which could be devastating if used in the right way. So of course you would want to be able to take advantage of this, and I think the best way to do that is with Fossil Aerodactyl, which is a card that was held back a lot because it's a stage 1. It has to evolve from Mysterious Fossil first, but this gave it an opportunity to actually pair with another card and work out really well. So you can use Aerodactyl and Mew together in a couple of different ways in this deck. For one, you can get out Aerodactyl fast so that your opponent can't play any evolutions from the get-go, or you can set up the Mew and bring in the Aerodactyl later to lock your opponent into using only basic Pokemon. And this completely depends on what you're up against. Say you're up against a Rain Dance deck, they usually just use Squirtle, Pokemon Breeder, and then Blastoise. So if you have a Blastoise that has maybe 70 damage counters on it, and you want to just devolve it straight into a Squirtle, that's a simple knockout by using Mew's attack. The flip side of this would be up against a Wigglytuff deck. In that case, you do not want them to get a Wigglytuff out on the field, so if you can get that Aerodactyl out really fast, a Jigglypuff isn't going to be much of a threat to you. Now this Aerodactyl has been teched into a lot of other decks that stand on their own, like Haymaker, so for this video I did want to incorporate it into a deck that focused more on the dynamic between the Aerodactyl and the Mew instead of just having it in a deck with a bunch of other cards that were unrelated. So let's go ahead and get into the bare bones of this Mono Psychic type of MewDactyl. So starting off, we do have 4 copies of Mysterious Fossil. Mysterious Fossil can be useful sometimes if you just want to throw it out as fodder. It doesn't count as a knockout, so if you just want to have basically a Pokédoll substitute to go in, you can use them for that as well. And then also the 4 Aerodactyl in this deck. You won't be using them as attackers very much. They're better off just sitting on the bench and using that power to keep your opponent from evolving. And then there's also 4 of the Black Star promo Mews in this deck as well. For this deck, Mew's attacks are actually both very useful. You can use that first attack to rack up damage on your opponent, while Aerodactyl keeps them from evolving, and it can be especially devastating on basics that you devolve earlier on. And I like to use Mr.Mime in this deck the same way that the Damage Swap deck uses it, is it can stall out those high evolution cards like a Blastoise. They can't deal any damage to it. And if you have a Mr.Mime out there to do that, it's easy to swap into a Mew and devolve it into a Squirtle after you've already put some damage on it. And of course, one of my favorite cards, it shows up in a lot of these decks that I make videos for, is the Black Star promo Mewtwo. It has a great attack. That absorption attack, and then you can use Psyburn the turn after, dealing a solid 40 damage. It's good in any Psychic deck. I have the Bill and Professor Oak, a full play set of each, just for the draw power, help you get what you need early on. The plus power helps get those knockouts when you're using either Mr.Mime or Mewtwo. And Gust of Wind helps to bring out those stage 1s or stage 2s that your opponent has been setting up on their bench. That way you can use Mew's Devolution Beam on them. I put Potion in this deck to serve as a substitute to Pokemon Center for Mr.Mime. So with Mr.Mime, you're wanting to keep those energy on there so that you can keep using its Meditate attack. And since Pokemon Center would have to remove those energies, I think Potion helps remove them fast enough. And Item Finder in this deck is actually a lot more valuable, I think, than it is in other decks, because in this deck you're using it to get back possibly Mysterious Fossils, even stuff like Potion to help keeping those Mr.Mimes fresh, or even if you want to get Gust of Wind so that you can keep making your opponent swap out whatever evolution cards are setting up on their bench so you can get rid of those with Mew's Devolution Beam. And I round out the deck with 18 Psychic Energy, and that does seem a bit high. One of the ideas is with Mewtwo's Absorption and Psyburn combo, you want to have a couple of those at least in your discard pile. You want to get rid of those with Professor Oak early on. And then also just energy removal and super energy removal can really disrupt this deck, since Mew, Mr. Mime, and Mewtwo all run off of pure Psychic Energy. So with this deck, you ideally want to start out with a Mr. Mime or a Mewtwo. That way you can stall for a bit while you're using your draw cards to get those mysterious fossils, and it's going to take 2 turns to set up an Aerodactyl. So if you can't outspeed your opponent with the Aerodactyl, you at least want to stall them out long enough to where you can get a Mew set up on your bench and then just swap into Mew, use that Devolution Beam, and then get Aerodactyl set up on your bench later on. Like I was saying earlier about Rain Dance, one strategy you might want to use is try to rack up a bunch of damage counters on like a stage 2 Pokemon that has a lot of HP or something like a Wigglytuff, and then swap out into Mew and devolve it so that it's going to knock out a Squirtle or a Jigglypuff instead. Or also, if you can get that Aerodactyl set up very early on in the game before your opponent can, you can just set it on the bench and then have a Mew or a Mr. Mime go out and just take care of whatever your opponent has. And one of the biggest problems that comes up with this deck is, what if you're up against Haymaker? What if you're up just against big basics, something like Damage Swap? Well, this deck can actually handle around situations like that. In playtesting, I found that Mewtwo can actually dispatch those Hitmonchan's pretty quick. If you can get a plus power on an Aerodactyl that's powered up, you can one-shot an Electabuzz. And although Damage Swap also uses a Mr. Mime and Chansey, which is another big basic, that deck can actually fall apart pretty quick if you can pull out an Alakazam and devolve it. The biggest problem I did run into when running this deck was actually getting those mysterious fossils out and then evolving into an Aerodactyl. What sucks is, after you have one Aerodactyl out, you can't set up another one on your bench. So a lot of times you'll be in a situation where you actually have your entire setup, but all your opponent has to do is play Gust of Wind to bring out your Aerodactyl, knock it out pretty quick, and then their next turn, if you can't get another Aerodactyl set up in time, they can pretty much get all of their setup done too. If you're going to be relying on the Mewtwo as your main attacker more than the Mr. Mime, then it would be wise to add in a couple of Computer Search, maybe in place of the Bills. That way you can discard those 2 Psychic Energy and get them in the discard a lot quicker for energy absorption. And because you will be using Mew's first attack a little bit in the game, you don't actually want to be using energy removals or super energy removals, because that's really just going to help you out. The more energy your opponent can load up on their Pokemon, even if it's unnecessary, that lets you bring in that Mew and deal a lot more damage to them. Aerodactyl can be a pretty reliable card in certain situations too. It can deal double damage to Wigglytuffs, Chanseys, and also its weakness is to Grass, which is almost never used in this format. It also has a resistance to fighting, which is really great in this format. However, its retreat cost is a little high, and that makes it a little hard to use, especially since you can't play more than one. Only because Aerodactyl's own ability keeps you from evolving further mysterious fossils. As always, let me know down in the comments what you think about this deck. Also, let me know different ways that you would play it or ways that you have played it. I'm always interested in hearing that. So goodbye, y'all.